My dad finally found a retirement plan with excellent credit. Those were the exact words raised in a toast by my stepdaughter, Chloe, at my mother's Diamond Jubilee. Let that sink in. At a dinner celebrating my mother's 75th birthday and our wedding anniversary in Denver, that is how I was introduced to the room. Not as a wife, not as a partner, but as a walking, breathing, financial contingency plan. My name is Clara. I'm 56 years old, and for the past 12 years following the death of my first husband, Thomas, I believed I had finally been handed a second chance at a real family. I had spent weeks planning this evening down to the smallest detail to ensure my mother, Eleanor, was comfortable with her walker. My son, Ethan, had driven down from Boulder after finishing his shift, joining us in the private dining room. It should have been a warm, golden night. Instead, it was the exact moment something inside my chest went completely, permanently still. It started 40 minutes earlier when Chloe swept into the private room. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat I had generously helped pay for, swinging a leather tote bag that cost more than my first car. She kissed Richard, gave my elderly mother a dismissive wave, and dropped into her seat. "Sorry. Traffic on Colorado Boulevard was absolute insane," she murmured, checking her phone. Traffic was not insane. Ethan had driven the exact same route and arrived 20 minutes early. But I swallowed the annoyance. In those days, I was trying hard to play the part of the modern, understanding stepmother. Richard had raised Chloe alone after a bitter divorce, and according to him, the girl had suffered emotional trauma. "You're giving her a real foundation, Clara," Richard used to whisper to me in the dark. "You're teaching her what a stable family looks like." I loved hearing those words. They made every dollar feel like an investment in a shared future. At first, the financial requests were small: a forgotten sorority fee, a textbook bill, a phone line upgrade. Then came the bulkier milestones: semester tuition installments, car insurance, monthly Jeep payments, and a steady living allowance meant to keep Chloe from having to work part-time so she could focus on her GPA. For the first 20 minutes, dinner actually flowed like a normal family gathering. My mother told a funny, nostalgic story about getting pulled over by a state trooper back in 1974 while driving my father's old Ford Falcon without a license. Ethan teased her lovingly, and even Richard laughed, his eyes crinkling in that warm, trustworthy way that had won me over during our first coffee date. Then Ethan politely looked across the table and asked Chloe how her university classes were tracking. Chloe didn't even look up from her phone. She tapped a fingernail against the screen, sighed, and said, "They're fine. College is honestly pretty easy when your dad manages to marry a woman who loves spreadsheets, automated bank transfers, and never asks questions." The table froze. Ethan stopped smiling instantly, his fork hovering above his plate. My sister's water glass lowered slowly. Richard gave a sharp, nervous chuckle, the exact kind of awkward laugh people deploy when they desperately want everyone to pretend a calculated insult was just harmless family banter. I stared straight across the table at Chloe. "What is that supposed to mean?" Chloe offered a lazy, unapologetic shoulder shrug. "Nothing. I'm just saying you're super organized." "That isn't what you just said." "Oh, come on, Clara. Don't be so sensitive," Richard interjected, waving a hand dismissively. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her fragile hands gripping the armrests. She was trying hard not to cause a scene on her own birthday, and the realization that my mother felt pressured to keep the peace made my blood run hot. Before I could breathe, Chloe lifted her crystal wine glass and stared right at me with cold, unblinking eyes. To my dad, she announced, her voice ringing clear across the silent room. He finally found a retirement plan with excellent credit. Nobody laughed. I set my fork down. The silver felt unusually heavy against the plate. Chloe, I said, my voice dropping into a dangerous, icy calm. Apologize. Chloe's eyebrows arched upward in mock innocence. For what? For insulting me at my mother's birthday table and for doing it with such profound disrespect. Chloe didn't look at me. She flicked her gaze straight toward her father, silently demanding protection. And that was the exact second Richard moved. He reached across the table and planted his palm directly over my wrist. It wasn't a violent grip meant to bruise, but it was heavy, deliberate, and immovable, an explicit physical barrier designed to shut me down. "She's not your daughter, Clara," Richard said, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "Don't correct her." He didn't whisper it. He said it loudly, clearly, deliberately. He wanted every single person sitting at that table, including my elderly mother and my adult son, to understand precisely where I ranked in the hierarchy of his life. I was the financial engine, nothing more. I looked down at his hand, clamping down on my wrist. The sudden pressure sent a sharp ache straight through my knuckles. "Take your hand off me, Richard," I said. He lifted his hand immediately, but rolled his eyes and shook his head with theatrical exhaustion. "You're turning a simple family joke into an absolute crisis. Clara, you have no sense of humor about this." Chloe leaned back against her velvet chair, a quiet, victorious smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. I opened my mouth to unleash every furious thought boiling in my chest, but my eyes drifted toward my mother. She wasn't looking at me with embarrassment. She was looking at me with absolute heartbreaking worry. And strangely, that single look grounded me. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up my cloth napkin, folded it into a neat square, and placed it right beside my untouched plate. "All right, Richard," I said softly, the sudden quietness in my voice making him pause. "You're entirely right, she isn't my daughter." Richard offered a relieved, condescending smirk. "Glad you finally see reason." "Then starting tonight," I interrupted, locking my eyes onto his, "I won't ever be expected to support her like one again." The ride home, in the dark silence of the SUV, was suffocating. Richard didn't start the engine right away. He sat with his hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the empty restaurant parking lot. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't angry. It was laced with a cold, punishing disappointment that hurt worse than a shout. "I am deeply embarrassed by you tonight, Clara," he said, shifting the car into gear and pulling out onto the highway toward Denver. "Chloe is young, and yes, she's spoiled sometimes. But you humiliated her in public. You made a scene over a simple family joke." I stared out the passenger window, watching the blur of streetlights streak against the glass. "She called me a retirement plan, Richard." "It was a joke," he snapped back, hitting the indicator light a bit too sharply. "You took it personally because you're insecure, and frankly, you need to remember that her university tuition for the upcoming semester is due next week. Don't let your personal feelings get in the way of her education." Those words sat in the quiet cabin like a physical weight, your personal feelings. In that moment, the terrifying shift hit me. For 12 years, I believed I was a partner in this marriage. But sitting there in the passenger seat, listening to him lecture me about funding his daughter while dismissing my dignity, I realized the bitter truth. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was an assigned financial utility, a revolving line of credit, with a wedding ring. When we finally got home, the house felt freezing. Richard walked straight upstairs, muttered something about a brief on his desk, and shut himself in his home office. He didn't even say goodnight. I couldn't sleep. My joints were aching from the damp mountain air, and a heavy, hollow thud echoed inside my chest every time I closed my eyes. 12 years ago, after Thomas passed away, the loneliness in this very house used to suffocate me. I remembered crying into my coffee mug morning after morning, terrified that it would grow old completely alone in a quiet, empty room. That intense, aching fear of isolation was what had made me drop my defenses when I met Richard. He had looked at me with such gentle eyes, telling me how much he admired an independent woman who ran her own financial consulting practice. He made me feel safe. He made me feel wanted. I wanted a home so badly that I had willingly handed over the keys to the front door, thinking love meant sharing everything without keeping score. Seeking a distraction from the throbbing pain in my knees, I dragged myself out of bed at 2 a.m, walked down the dim hallway, and opened my laptop on the kitchen counter to look up an old software subscription receipt I needed for my business taxes. My fingers automatically moved to open our shared household ledger folder. I wasn't investigating. I wasn't suspicious. I just wanted a quick distraction from the knot in my stomach. Then my eyes caught a strange line item. A transfer of $4,200 dated 3 weeks ago, categorized vaguely under home maintenance. Frowning, I clicked open the digital bank statement history for the past 18 months. I didn't need any complex auditing, spreadsheets, or complicated formulas. The visual shock hit my eyes instantly like a splash of cold water. Row after row of numbers laid it all out plain and clear. More than $65,000 of my personal savings, money I had set aside from my own consulting firm before we even married, had been systematically drained. It wasn't just Chloe's tuition bills, boutique shopping sprees, or car insurance payments. There were large, recurring electronic transfers, moving straight out of my personal account and landing directly into Richard's private corporate business account. Thousands of dollars at a time, month after month, funneling quietly into his failing law practice while he smiled across the dinner table and praised me for being a good stepmother. I sat there in the dark kitchen, the blue glow of the laptop screen casting a cold light across my face. The silence of the house felt deafening. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange, numbing realization washed over me, freezing every tear before it could form. I had spent the last 12 years believing my generosity was building a warm, loving sanctuary. But as I stared at the cold, digital numbers blinking on the screen, a bitter, self-reproaching thought echoed in my mind. I was so desperate to be loved that I didn't realize my own kindness was just an open invitation for a thief. The very next morning, before the sun had even cleared the Denver skyline, I sat at my desk and pulled up my banking app. With 3 steady taps on my phone screen, I locked every shared credit card tied to my account and permanently canceled all automated monthly transfers to Chloe. The backlash was instant. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed violently on the counter. It was Chloe, calling from what sounded like a crowded, echoing hallway. Her voice wasn't tearful. It was sharp, with pure, unfiltered indignation. "Clara, what is wrong with your cards?" she demanded, without a greeting. "I'm standing right at the checkout counter at Cherry Creek Mall with 3 bags of clothes, and your card just got declined twice. Everyone is staring at me. Fix it right now." "You can pay for your own clothes today, Chloe," I answered, my voice entirely level. "Are you serious right now?" she shrieked over the store noise. "My dad told you to take care of this. You're punishing me just because you threw a childish tantrum at Grandma's party." Before I could reply, she hung up with a sharp click. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Gwen, Richard's younger sister, who rarely called unless she needed a favor or a loan. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before she unloaded. "Clara, what on earth is wrong with you?" Gwen snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Chloe just called me in tears, humiliated in public. How can you be so selfish and heartless? Just because your feelings got hurt over a minor family joke, you're cutting off a young girl's education and livelihood. She is family, Clara. You're acting like a bitter, vindictive stepmother. Family." That single word echoed in my empty kitchen like a slap to the face. In that moment, the brutal, unvarnished truth crashed down on me. For 12 long years, I had fooled myself into believing I belonged. But as Gwen's angry words faded, I finally saw the reality of my position. Richard's entire family had never once considered me a wife, a partner, or an equal. To them, I was simply an open ATM machine with legs, a convenient financial utility meant to fund their lives while they sneered at me behind my back. The loneliness that washed over me then was heavier than anything I had felt after Thomas passed away. At least with grief, there was a grave to visit. This was worse. I was sharing a bed with a man who was quietly bleeding me dry, while his family treated my generosity as an absolute entitlement. My phone buzzed a third time. I stared at the screen, bracing myself for another attack, but it was a text message from my son, Ethan. "Mom, are you okay? Call me whenever you can. I'm on your side always. Remember what I told you about Richard from day one." Reading those few simple words from my son saved me from drowning in that kitchen. Ethan had always kept his distance from Richard, sensing a cold ambition beneath my husband's charming exterior that I had stubbornly chosen to ignore. I called Ethan back immediately, and for the first time, I didn't make excuses for my husband. I told my son everything about the $65,000 drained from my pre-marriage savings account. "You need to protect yourself, Mom," Ethan urged me, his voice steady and fiercely protective. "Do not let him take another dime." I didn't wait. By noon, I drove across town to meet Nathaniel, a trusted family attorney and a dear friend of my late husband, Thomas. We sat in his quiet, leather-scented office while I slid my bank records across his desk. Nathaniel didn't say a word as he scanned the recurring transfers flowing straight into Richard's corporate account. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "Clara, this goes far beyond marital overreach," Nathaniel said quietly, taking off his reading glasses. "This is systematic financial misappropriation, and worse. Look at this property deed amendment filed 6 months ago." He handed me a legal document. My breath caught in my throat. It was a post-nuptial property rider regarding our home, the very house I had purchased and paid off entirely with my own inheritance years before I ever met Richard. My signature was scrawled at the bottom. Except I had never signed it. Richard had forged my signature while I was recovering from knee surgery last fall, attempting to transfer joint ownership rights directly to his name. Sitting there in Nathaniel's office, the chilling reality set in. Richard wasn't just using me for spending money. He was systematically laying the groundwork to steal my home, strip away my life's work, and leave me with nothing. Richard didn't yell when he realized I had locked the cards. He didn't bring up the financial cuts, and he didn't argue about the frozen accounts. Instead, he completely changed his strategy, shifting into a brand of terrifying calculated courtesy. Within 24 hours, the man became a ghost of domestic perfection. Every morning, I would wake up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee waiting on the kitchen counter, brewed precisely the way I liked it. He started folding the bathroom towels with military precision, cooking dinner with elaborate care, and leaving sweet little sticky notes on the refrigerator door, reminding me to take my vitamins. Every single one of those sweet domestic gestures came bundled with a new piece of paperwork. "Here are the joint investment portfolio statements, honey. Just sign at the bottom so we can streamline things," he would say, flashing that warm, trustworthy smile that used to make me feel safe. Except now, every document he slid across the breakfast table had a sticky arrow pointing straight to a signature line, conveniently hiding the fine print underneath. I didn't sign a single page. I kept my mouth shut, playing along, while my lawyer Nathaniel reviewed every document behind the scenes. But what Richard was doing at home was only a smokescreen for the real poison he was spreading outside our front door. The true nightmare hit me on a quiet Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing spreadsheets at my desk. My phone rang. It was Arthur Sloan, an old friend who owned the city's oldest hardware store downtown, a man whose modest business accounts I had managed and protected through hard economic times for over 10 years. Arthur's voice, on the other end of the line, wasn't its usual booming, cheerful self. It sounded thick, trembling, and choked with deep distress. "Clara," Arthur whispered, clearing his throat awkwardly. Are you doing all right lately, my dear?" I frowned, setting my pen down. "I'm fine, Arthur, just busy with tax season. Why do you ask?" There was a long, painful pause in the line before Arthur let out a heavy, shuddering sigh. "I'm calling because I didn't want to believe it, but you've always been honest with me, so I need to be honest with you. Richard stopped by the hardware store yesterday." My chest tightened. "Richard? What did he want?" "He didn't come to buy anything," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, painful murmur. "He pulled me aside in the aisle, looking all sad and exhausted. He told me that you've been cracking under the stress of aging. He said your memory has started slipping badly, that you've been getting confused with numbers, and that you're showing early signs of cognitive decline." The air left my lungs. The office around me seemed to tilt on its axis. "He said it out of deep concern as a loving husband," Arthur continued, sounding deeply uncomfortable. "He told me he was stepping in to take over your financial files, to protect my business from any mistakes. Then he played me a voice recording on his phone, a snippet of you sounding tired and frustrated on the phone last week, to prove you were losing your grip." Arthur paused, his voice cracking with emotion. "Clara, I've known you for a decade. I know your mind is sharper than a tack. But when a husband plays a recording of his own wife sounding confused to prove she's losing her mind, it made my stomach turn. I had to let you know. I couldn't speak. I sat frozen in my office chair, clutching the phone so tightly, my knuckles turned pure white. Arthur muttered a soft goodbye and hung up, leaving me alone in the dead silence of the room. The anger didn't explode out of me this time. Instead, a cold, paralyzing terror gripped my heart. This wasn't just about money anymore. Richard wasn't merely trying to drain my bank accounts or steal my house. He was launching a calculated psychological execution of my reputation. He knew exactly what terrified a woman in her mid-50s more than anything else in the world. The haunting, silent fear of losing her mind, of aging out of relevance, of watching her lifelong professional credibility turn to ash. He was weaponizing my age against me, turning my own husband's mask into a medical weapon to convince our entire community that I was unfit, unstable, and mentally incompetent. Sitting there in the quiet office, as the reality of his cruelty sank into my bones, a fierce, burning resolve finally chased away the last remnants of my fear. Richard wanted to break my mind and bury my dignity, but he had no idea what kind of fire he had just awakened inside me. 2 days after I learned about the forged property deed, I received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. It was from Chloe. She asked to meet me at a quiet corner booth in a neighborhood coffee shop just off Colfax Avenue. At first I hesitated, after the way she had mocked me at my mother's birthday dinner and screamed at me over the card decline, every instinct told me to ignore it. But something in her text, a short, broken plea saying she was completely alone and needed to talk, made me change my mind. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The high-end leather tote bag and the cream-colored designer cashmere coat were gone. She was wearing an oversized hoodie, her hair pulled back into a messy bun with no makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She didn't waste any time. As soon as I slid into the vinyl booth across from her, she pushed a thick manila folder across the table. "My dad cut me off, Clara," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely get the words out. "He locked my student housing account, canceled my credit cards, and told me that if I couldn't convince you to sign over your house and your savings to him, I was on my own." I opened the folder. Inside were printed email threads between Richard and his personal accountant, alongside drafts of legal documents. Reading through them made my blood run cold. They weren't just plans to take my home. They were calculated strategies detailing how Richard had used Chloe as a pawn from day one, feeding her a narrative that I was just a cold source of income so she would help pressure me into signing legal papers. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with heavy, shuddering sobs. "I thought he loved me," she choked out, tears spilling through her fingers. "I thought everything he did was to protect me. But yesterday, when I told him I wouldn't lie for him anymore, he screamed at me. He told me I was useless if I couldn't control you. He said I was just a liability." Hearing those words broke something in my chest, but this time it wasn't pain. It was a profound, aching pity. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me, realizing we had both been trapped in the exact same cage, manipulated by the exact same master of lies. Richard had never loved either of us. We were simply two instruments in his orchestra, played until we stopped making money and then discarded. I reached across the sticky table to Chloe's trembling hands in mine and squeezed them gently. "Look at me, Chloe," I said softly. She lifted her tear-stained face and looked into my eyes. "You made mistakes," I told her, my voice steady and honest. "You were cruel, and you were entitled, and you treated me with a disrespect I didn't deserve. But you are also just 21 years old, and you were raised by a man who views everyone in his life as a transaction." Chloe swallowed hard, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve. "Are you going to help me?" "I'm going to help you wake up," I answered, letting go of her hands. "I will help you figure out how to get your name off your father's shared accounts. And I can help you find a part-time job to cover your textbook costs. But I am not writing another blank check, Chloe. And I am not buying your apartment anymore." She nodded slowly, a heavy sense of defeat and realization settling over her features. "I know. I'm moving out of the campus apartment tonight. I found a cheaper room in a shared house near the campus, and I'm going to start paying my own way. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything." "I know you are," I replied. 2 weeks later, Chloe packed her remaining bags and moved out of Richard's house, cutting off all contact with him entirely. She started working evening shifts at a local bookstore while keeping up with her classes, finally learning what it meant to stand on her own 2 feet. As for Richard, his web of deceit unraveled completely. Armed with Nathaniel's legal filings and Arthur's testimony, I filed for an immediate restraining order, exposed his corporate financial embezzlement, and initiated divorce proceedings to reclaim every single penny he had stolen. The house is quiet now, but it is no longer empty. For the first time in 12 years, the silence doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like peace. The grand ballroom of the downtown Denver Convention Center was packed to the absolute brim. It was the city's annual Business Excellence Gala, the most anticipated black tie event of the season. Flashbulbs popped against velvet drapes, soft jazz floated through the air, and local business leaders in expensive tuxedos and designer gowns mingled under towering crystal chandeliers. Tonight was supposed to be Richard's crowning achievement. He was slated to receive the prestigious Entrepreneur of the Year award, and he had explicitly commanded me to stand right beside him on stage, acting as the loyal, smiling prop he needed to project a bulletproof image while his firm was secretly crumbling beneath him. 10 minutes before the ceremony started, we stood together in the shadows just behind the main stage curtains. Richard adjusted his silk bow tie in the mirror, his face cold and tight as he turned to me. He leaned in close, his voice dropping into a venomous hiss so the passing event staff wouldn't hear. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," Richard whispered, his eyes narrowing into hard slits. "When they call my name, you will walk out there with me. You will keep that fake smile plastered on your face, and you will play the proud, supportive wife. If you try any of your little stunts tonight, or if you embarrass me in front of these people, I will make sure you lose everything you have left. Do you understand me?" I didn't flinch. I didn't tremble. I looked straight back into his eyes with a terrifying, absolute calm that completely caught him off guard. "I understand you perfectly, Richard," I said softly. Before he could process my tone, the master of ceremonies boomed across the auditorium microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award recipient, Mr. Richard Vance." The entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Spotlight swept across the stage, and Richard instantly snapped back into his charming, charismatic public persona, flashing a dazzling smile, shaking hands with the board members, and stepping briskly up to the center podium where the gleaming glass trophy waited. He gestured gracefully toward the wings, looking right at me with a silent, menacing glare that telegraphed a clear threat. "Get out here right now." I took a slow, deliberate breath. I didn't step out from the wings. Instead, I walked straight up the center steps of the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wooden floor. Richard's smile flickered for a fraction of a second, surprised that I had chosen to walk up to the microphone rather than stand quietly beside him. He assumed I was simply falling in line to deliver the standard, obedient praise. He leaned comfortably against the podium, resting one hand on the trophy, waiting for me to hand him the spotlight. I didn't look at him. I stepped past his outstretched hand, reached out, and pulled the gooseneck microphone firmly toward me. The low hum of the massive sound system filled the silent pause across the hall. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, expecting a sweet, romantic tribute from a devoted wife. Instead, my voice rang out clean, steady, and loud across the entire auditorium. "Thank you all for this moment," I began, my eyes scanning the sea of startled faces in the crowd. "And thank you, Richard, for giving me this unexpected platform tonight. Because for 12 years I've played the part of the supportive partner. But tonight, before the city, it is time to set the record straight." Richard's face drained of color in an instant. He lunged forward, his hand clawing desperately toward the microphone. "Clara, stop this right now," he barked, his voice accidentally catching on the live audio feed. I stepped smoothly out of his reach, raising my voice to cut right over him. "As of this morning," I announced clearly, "I have officially filed for divorce. Furthermore, I have initiated full criminal investigations into corporate embezzlement alongside formal legal filings, proving that my personal savings were systematically drained and my private property deed was forged without my consent." The entire ballroom went dead, absolute silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Richard completely lost control. His professional mask shattered into a million pieces. Snarling with absolute rage, he launched himself across the stage like a cornered animal, lunging directly at the microphone stand to rip it out of my hands and silence me in front of the entire city. "Get away from that mic, you crazy bitch," he screamed, his voice echoing brutally through the massive speakers. Before his hands could even touch the metal stand, 2 security guards rushed up the steps from the wings, tackling Richard firmly by the shoulders and pinning his arms back against his designer tuxedo jacket. Flashbulbs strobed frantically from the press row down front, capturing every single second of his public disgrace. I stood completely still beside the microphone, looking down at the man who had tried to steal my life, my home, and my mind. Justice didn't arrive by accident, and it wasn't handed to me by luck. It was won through cold facts, unyielding preparation, and the courage to face the dark. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed my public announcement hung thick over the entire Denver Convention Hall. Hundreds of elite business leaders sat completely frozen in their seats, staring up at the stage in absolute shock, hardly daring to draw a breath. For a few terrifying seconds, nobody moved. Then I watched Richard snap, his face completely drained of color, twisting instantly into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He lunged forward, his hands clawing at the air as he tried to storm across the stage to shut me up. But before he could take 2 steps, the 2 security guards, who had rushed up from the wings, grabbed him by the shoulders, pinning his arms firmly back against his expensive tuxedo jacket. "Get your hands off me, you fools!" Richard roared, his voice cracking with panic and rage, echoing brutally through the live sound system. Before the murmurs in the crowd could even swell into chaos, a familiar, steady voice cut cleanly through the quiet from the center rows of the auditorium. "I can verify every word Mrs. Vance just said." All heads whipped around. Old Arthur Sloan, the owner of the city's oldest hardware store, slowly stood up from his seat. He looked older and smaller under the giant crystal chandeliers, but his expression was entirely resolute. He reached deliberately into his coat pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and tapped the screen. A second later, the sharp, clear audio of Richard's voice echoed directly through the Grand Hall's massive public address speakers for every single person to hear. "She's been cracking under the stress of aging. Her memory has started slipping badly. I need to step in to protect my business from her mistakes." The recording played loud and clear, bouncing off the velvet drapes. A collective sharp gasp rippled through the entire crowd. Arthur looked straight up at the stage, his voice ringing out across the silent room. "Richard Vance came into my shop last week and played that exact voice recording to slander his own wife," Arthur announced, pointing a steady finger right at him. "He attempted to paint her as mentally incompetent so he could steal her financial accounts behind her back. I've known Clara for 10 years. She is the sharpest, most honest financial professional this city has ever seen." Before the shock of Arthur's revelation could even settle, another voice rang out sharply from the very back rows near the double doors. It was Chloe. She stood completely alone, wearing her simple oversized hoodie instead of a glamorous evening gown. Her hands were shaking visibly by her sides, but her voice carried clearly across the vast room, refusing to break. "He lied to me too," Chloe called out, her voice trembling slightly before steadying itself. "My dad used me as a pawn. He fed me lies about Clara for years just to manipulate me into helping him steal her house and her savings. Everything she just told you tonight is the truth. I was blind, but I see it all now." The room completely erupted. The initial shock turned into a massive wave of condemning murmurs, gasps, and outraged whispers bouncing from wall to wall. On the stage, the board members of the Business Excellence Association immediately huddled together in hurried, grim consultation. After a tense moment, the chairman of the committee, walked briskly to the center podium, picked up a microphone, and raised his hand for silence. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented here tonight," the chairman announced firmly, his voice echoing heavy with disgust, "the association is immediately revoking Mr. Richard Vance's nomination and award. Security, please escort him out of the building." Richard didn't fight the guards anymore. All the bluster, all the arrogant charm, and all the lies vanished in an instant. His head hung low in total defeat, his public mask shattered into dust as the two guards dragged him backward, disappearing into the shadows of the wings in total disgrace. The legal battle didn't vanish overnight, but the moment the ink dried on the final deed returning my home to my name, the heavy weight in my chest finally lifted. Richard didn't even show up for the final settlement hearing. His fancy law firm was gone, liquidated to pay back a fraction of what he stole, and he had already packed his bags for a dreary, cramped studio apartment across town. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he spends his evenings alone in that box, staring at empty walls where his plaques used to hang. As for Chloe, she didn't disappear from my life entirely, but the dynamic changed completely. She started showing up at my front porch on Tuesday evenings, not to ask for money, but with a brown paper bag containing 2 coffees and a cheap pastry. We sat on the front steps talking quietly about her classes at the bookstore and her new part-time job. She was learning what it meant to earn her own ground, one small shift at a time. 3 months after the gala, on a brisk Tuesday afternoon, I finally walked back into the master bedroom. Richard's side of the closet was entirely empty. Just bare wooden hangers and a faint smell of his cologne that was already fading into the dust. On his nightstand sat a sleek, expensive smartwatch he had left behind in his rush to pack. I picked it up, turned it over in my palm, and tossed it straight into the garbage bin by the door. I walked over to the mahogany desk by the window, where Thomas's old framed photograph sat under the soft autumn sunlight. My late husband's gentle, steady eyes looked out at me from behind the glass, unchanging through all the years and all the chaos. I picked up the frame, gently dusting the wooden edge with my thumb. "I'm back, Thomas," I whispered into the quiet room. I didn't sit down to wallow in the past. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the new client roster for my independent financial consulting firm, and started drafting a fresh proposal. My business, built with my own hands long before Richard ever entered my life, was expanding. I had turned down 3 major corporate accounts during my marriage because Richard claimed I worked too much, but now my schedule belonged entirely to me. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the soft rustle of autumn leaves blowing against the window glass. The silence of the house wasn't terrifying anymore. It wasn't a cage, and it wasn't a trap. It was just open space waiting for whatever I decided to build next. 2 years have passed since that night at the Grand Gala, and looking back, I almost don't recognize the woman I used to be. Time has a strange way of smoothing out jagged edges. My independent financial consulting firm didn't just survive. It flourished beyond anything I'd planned. I moved my office out of the spare bedroom and into a proper downtown suite with tall glass windows overlooking the bustling Denver streets. I hired 2 brilliant young financial analysts, women right out of university who remind me so much of the fierce ambition I buried away during my marriage. I make it my personal mission to mentor them, ensuring they never let any man convince them that their career is secondary or that their money is common property. My personal life expanded too, stripped of all the fake obligations and performative social events. My son Ethan stops by every Sunday for dinner, and we actually talk, really talk, without the cold, suffocating shadow of Richard hanging over our conversations. And Chloe? She kept her word too. She transferred to a university downtown, finished her degree while working shifts at the bookstore, and now she's interning at a marketing firm. Every other Tuesday, she still shows up on my porch with 2 coffees, and we sit on the front steps, laughing about old mistakes and talking about her future. As for Richard, he's just a ghost of a bad memory now. I hear he left Denver altogether after his firm dissolved and his debts piled up, moving somewhere out east where nobody knows his name or his hollow charm. Good riddance. Yesterday morning, I woke up before sunrise, poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, and walked out onto my back patio. The mountain air was crisp and biting, smelling faintly of pine and approaching winter. I wrapped my woolen scarf tighter around my neck and looked out over the city skyline glowing under the pale morning sun. I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel broken. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm liquid trace all the way down to my chest, and smiled to myself. For the first time in my life, I'm accountable to nobody except the person looking back at me in the mirror. And let me tell you, she is doing just fine.